All right, this is the first part of a video of a lecture for a Natural Resource Ecology class at SUNY ESF that I'm recording now in 2019. So today we're talking about terrestrial ecosystems, and throughout class we've been emphasizing the role of the abiotic and the embiotic environment in structuring and influencing populations and communities and ecosystems. And we've really left out one dominant organism that has a dramatic influence on the structure and function of ecosystems, and that's humans and the role of human impacts on ecosystems. So today we're going to talk about land use history, how human decisions have shaped the landscape of forests that we see today. All right. So let's consider walking through an ecosystem and starting from a stream and the lower elevations of an Adirondack system and walking up to the uplands. And let's think about the types of habitats that we see, and as kind of a prelude to thinking about how humans have influenced those habitats. So if we start at a stream bank and simply walk a transect, we will see a riparian ecosystem with water and the plants and trees associated with that riparian system, and in this case dominated by one type of organism, these coniferous trees. And if we move up away from the stream bank, we would move through into a different community type of different organisms, shifting to a larger hardwood composition in some of the upland slopes. And if we but there are exceptions, right? And so there are previous land use decisions, particularly about planting conifer plantations on those slopes, generates differences in the community compositions. These simplified coniferous plantations provide useful things for humans, but they reflect a legacy of a prior land use decision by a human. So if we keep walking this transect, we might go past other aspects of the topography that change the ecosystem properties of water and soil type that might change the species composition into a different community. But if we go up the slope, we often will be in a semi-diverse hardwood forest with a herbaceous layer that then changes substantially with elevation as we climb up a mountain. And so there's turnover of the species composition and some of the ecosystem properties as we move up that slope. And so topography has a strong impact on the communities that we see, particularly in the Northeast, where there are strong topographical impacts on the fertility of the soil, because the lowlands often have, over long periods of time, received deposits, alluvial deposits. That soil has been transported and moved down by rivers and erosion, and so the lowlands often have deeper soils, perhaps with a little more fertility. You'll see a lot of the farms that still exist in the Northeast exist on lowlands. In the uplands, because they have lost soil, those soils tend to be shallower and rockier. But topography affects the soil, but it also affects the climate, where we have generally a cooler climate. And these soils and the climatic difference have direct influence of the vegetation, but the vegetation also reflects human land use decisions. And so if you look at a landscape in the Northeast, and I encourage you to do this on some of our field trips as we're driving down to Heiberg in particular, you'll often see farming in the flat lowlands on relatively deep and fertile soils. And the uplands used to be farms, and those farms were often abandoned and have degraded into forests. One landscape feature that is often indicative of prior land use particularly in the northeastern landscape, are these rock walls. So these rock walls were created by human settlers that moved these rocks to be able to facilitate their plowing of the field to planting crops. And so these people worked very hard to move lots of rocks, to move them out of the soils they were trying to cultivate with plows. And in so doing, they often piled them into rock walls. And this is a particularly pretty one, but these rock walls are a common feature in New York and New England and reflect a agricultural land use history. So all these rocks used to exist in these surrounding fields and have simply been piled up and moved by humans. And so if you walk through a forest in New York or New England, you'll often find a rock wall that used to separate two agricultural fields that is now had a forest grown up around it. And so those rock walls can be useful reminders of a past land use, but also a indication of how strongly these landscapes have changed with farm abandonment and the encroachment of forests into these systems. And so that ends part 1 of this video series. Check back for part 2.